Good morning, this is the Paradise Unicorn Priestess bringing you day 306 of A Course in Miracles, the Yin translation where we use female words. This would be November 2nd if you're starting at the new year. Clarification of terms introduction. This is not a course in philosophical speculation, nor is it concerned with precise terminology. It is concerned only with atonement, or the correction of perception. The means of the atonement is forgiveness. The structure of individual consciousness is essentially irrelevant because it is a concept representing the original error or the original sin. To study the error itself does not lead to correction, if you are indeed to succeed in overlooking the error. And it is just this process of overlooking at which the Course aims. All terms are potentially controversial, and those who seek controversy will find it. Yet those who seek clarification will find it as well. They must, however, be willing to overlook controversy, recognizing that it is a defense against truth in the form of a delaying maneuver. Theological considerations, as such, are necessarily controversial, since they depend on belief and can therefore be accepted or rejected. A universal theology is impossible, but a universal experience is not only possible but necessary. It is this experience toward which the Course is directed. Here alone, consistency becomes possible, because here alone uncertainty ends. This Course remains within the ego framework where it is needed. It is not concerned with what is beyond all error because it is planned only to set the direction towards it. Therefore, it uses words which are symbolic and cannot express what lies beyond symbols. It is merely the ego that questions because it is only the ego that doubts. The Course merely gives another answer once a question has been raised. However, this answer does not attempt to resort to inventiveness or ingenuity. These are attributes of the ego. The Course is simple. It has one function and one goal. Only in that does it remain wholly consistent, because only that can be consistent. The ego will demand many answers that this Course does not give. It does not recognize as questions the mere form of a question to which an answer is impossible. The ego may ask, how did the impossible occur? To what did the impossible happen? And may ask this in many forms. Yet there is no answer, only an experience. Seek only this and do not let theology delay you. You will notice that the emphasis on structural issues in the Course is brief and early. Afterwards, and soon, it drops away to make way for the central teaching. Since you have asked for clarification, however, these are some of the terms that are used. I love how this comes out and just says that the structure of individual consciousness is essentially irrelevant. Indeed, isn't that what the ego is? It's the supposedly cut off separate individual, and it is irrelevant. That's kind of the whole point, isn't it? Our relevance comes in the relationship between us as we connect, become more and more aware of our connections with one another, because there is only one child of God, and that is all of the creation, every particle of it included, no part left out. Truly, individual consciousness is irrelevant, and that is the focus of our study. That is the whole point. It goes on to suggest that our individual consciousnesses, our ego, will tend to look for controversy and tend to look for answers to questions that invite complexity and try to lean on such things as ingenuity and inventiveness, which are things that the Course previously explained are entirely of the ego and are not part of heaven and not part of truth. Because truth is simple. It's not complex at all. The complexity, that's the hand-wavium. That's the look over there, the distraction, so you don't see the man behind the curtain, So you don't see how simple it really is, that there's just one, and that all of time and space is an illusion. So the clarification of terms is saying, let's not get into the weeds with this. This is a thing that was asked for. And it says, you asked for it. Who is the you who asked for it? Perhaps the original channel for the work of A Course in Miracles. It may have been Helen herself who had asked for these clarification of terms. So it's a sort of concession granted because it was asked for, not necessarily because it was needed. It says controversy is a defense against the truth and is a delaying maneuver, and that theological considerations are necessarily controversial. They depend on belief, and we've discussed that all beliefs are in fact false and must eventually be relinquished, so that we may receive knowledge again, for which no belief is necessary. It says a universal theology is impossible, but universal experience is not only possible but necessary. Why is a universal theology impossible? Is it because it relies on form? And as we move towards happier dreams, towards paradise, towards the real world, which still has form of a sort, but is closer and closer to the values of heaven, values of universality and oneness. But perhaps as long as there is form, there will be differences in consciousness that make the oneness not perceptible. We're not able to see the oneness as long as we are holding differences due to our need to be attached to form. Form introduces those differences, and theology has some sort of form. It's the universal experience that is being sought. And what is the experience? It's love. Of course, it's love. This passage goes on to say that the Course remains within the ego framework where it is needed. In essence, the Course is talking to our ego. It is training our ego. It is using logic to convince the ego to relinquish itself, to relinquish its programming, and return its resources to the direction of love, to stop trying to separate itself out, and to stop trying to fight against the rest of all that is, to tell it all that you are fighting against is also you. It's trying to convince the ego that its true identity is all that is. So to lay down every weapon, every attack, every defense, to forgive. The ego is the nightmare, and when it wakes up, it dissipates into our collective true identity. The Course here says that it is not concerned with what is beyond all error. It just is setting our course in the direction of truth and of heaven. That being said, it speaks of the state of heaven on and off with some consistency. And what it says is intimidating, because I don't know about you, dear listener, but I am not ready to be without form and to give it up. And I imagine that most of us here in the illusion are not, and that's why we're here. But then our being here is our very usefulness, because we are in the position to reach out and really make connection with those others also very much lost in the illusion, and likely in suffering, because as the Course teaches, that's what the illusion brings. And only forgiveness and love brings healing from that suffering. That love is to be found in the illusion where our other selves have already been reaching out in the prayer of their hearts, whether they realize it or not, and have already been following that inner guidance of love. The passage goes on to say that there are many questions that the ego would ask that the Course does not answer. The Course does not recognize as true questions the sort of questions the ego asks. And there was a part in the text that addressed this in depth, how basically the ego only asks questions that are traps. They are full of assumptions. They are not open-ended. They are not sitting there with an open mind waiting to receive understanding. Rather, they are full of the ego's own propaganda and seek to trap into that propaganda the one who would answer the question. So, yeah, most of the questions that the ego asks, well, pretty much all the questions the ego asks contain an inner gotcha. And the Course has no interest in dealing with that at all. That's why the emphasis on the open-ended questions, of which it gives plenty of examples. They're found in the latter lessons of the workbook. They're found here in the manual for teachers, these open-ended questions that don't have a propaganda in them. There's no gotcha hidden in the question. There's no agenda in the question itself. And after we review what is the second coming, found in show notes, we go on to lesson 306. The gift of Christ is all I seek today. What but Christ's vision would I use today, when it can offer me a day in which I see a world so like to heaven that an ancient memory returns to me? Today I can forget the world I made. Today I can go past all fear and be restored to love and holiness and peace. Today I am redeemed and born anew into a world of mercy and of care, of loving kindness and the peace of God. And so, our Mother, we return to you, remembering we never went away, remembering your holy gifts to us. In gratitude and thankfulness we come, with empty hands and open hearts and minds, asking but what you give. We cannot make an offering sufficient for your child, but in your love, the gift of Christ is hers. I love today's repeated emphasis on today. It reminds me of towards the end of the Course, where it has basically the rules for having a happy day. We are reminded that salvation is not some future thing far off. Christianity has taught people that salvation is a thing that happens after you die, if you were good enough, if you believed in Jesus enough. Again, this is where I feel the story of the crucifixion does us harm, because we look to Jesus as the pattern, as the example, and we see Jesus descend into suffering and then death, and only then receive salvation. I mean, Jesus even passed on that pattern and example to the disciples. Now you go forth into a world that hates you, and they'll take you down and torture and murder you. And you won't have your salvation until after that either. More damaging story to let go of. It's natural for us to go, oh, well, clearly I have to go through this life of suffering that's just going to get worse and worse and worse and end in a horrible suffering mess. And then, after all of that, I get to have salvation. No, let that story go. Salvation is now. No more suffering. Salvation is now. Let's take a moment and step away from the life of Jesus and look at the life of the Buddha. Let's look at this as another pattern and example to follow. Neither one of them perfect, neither one of them like this is the way it has to be or is supposed to be. But the Buddha was not crucified. The Buddha did not meet with huge amounts of increasing anger and resistance. Yes, there was resistance, but there was also a beautiful growing of following that then grew and grew after his death. No crucifixion, no martyrdom needed for that popularity to spread. And it spread quite well without it. And this was before Jesus happened on earth. So let us remember that there are gentler paths, and we don't have to look at that cruel path as the pattern set out for a disciple of truth. The Buddha did not teach sacrifice. The Buddha taught moderation. His death is described as having happened after having a lovely meal, which may have been pork, which would seem to go against what many think of as the teachings of the Buddha. It's an interesting story, an interesting culmination of a fascinating life. He had a lovely meal of a food that maybe his own teachings said he shouldn't have been eating. Then he got food poisoning and died. What a vastly different Last Supper. Just one version of a story of someone who was an ascended master. How many other stories are there out there that we don't know about? What about Baba Ji, who supposedly never did taste of death, but simply transcended his body, but appears in his body to people on the earth today, in a body full of youth and health, and offering the teachings of eternity? So many spiritual traditions, including the Course, teach us that salvation is only found in the present moment. So each day is a fresh new day. Each now is a fresh now in which salvation may be born. Let it be today. Happy practicing.